Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Media day for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix is done. Hamilton and Leclerc talking an awful lot about the state of affairs at Ferrari right now and what their prospects could be this weekend, given that Leclerc is stuck in a pole around here every time of asking over the last several years, but also with all the drama emerging at Red Bull, what their lineup is going to be next season. Tsunoda and Hadjar giving their perspective on the matter. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I'd greatly appreciate it. Let's begin right about here because we have some rear wings to have a look at. This is the McLaren, this is the Red Bull, the Mercedes and the Ferrari, but there are some other ones that are worthy of note here, right? Because we know that Baku is, well, pretty notorious for having a massive straight. You do need a bit of downforce. You're not necessarily going to run a Monza wing, or are you? Because if we look at the Alpine rear wing, that is very slim. And you guys remember back in 2022, I think it was, even the last few years in general, Alpine, despite their power deficit, they do enjoy running a very low downforce wing in Baku and just trying to get away with it around the rest of the lap. That may work in a race if they benefit from a safety car. In qualifying, it could be a challenge for them. The Haas is notably significantly more loaded. I mean, look at the difference there between the Monza wing on the Alpine and what is a substantially more loaded wing on the Haas. You know, there's obviously pros and cons to both approaches, but we'll see what they actually turn up with, certainly when they go into full qualifying spec on the Saturday. Now, speaking of that, there are a couple of things to mention when it comes to the weather forecast. It seems there's a possibility of some precipitation on the weekend. It's not especially likely. I went to the most updated one that I just, went to this website here that also this graphic is from that we just looked at. The key thing to note, I would say, is on the winds, because the winds is looking very strong and gusty on the Saturday and the Sunday. Certainly for qualifying, that is probably going to be a factor, right? We know that the wind into braking zones and other things like this can be particularly relevant. Baku is a windy city in general, but it looks like just as the Grand Prix weekend is here, it's getting especially treacherous for the drivers. So while it may not be rain that disrupts the weekends, there could be other things that affect qualifying and the race on the Sunday. Now, another update for you all is this. This, to be honest, kind of came out of nowhere. So we know that Mohammed Ben Sulayem is the current FIA president. He is not the most popular, shall we say, with the Formula 1 community at large. Now, he will be challenged by Tim Mayer, who will give it a go to try and become the president himself. Now, Ben Sulayem is the incumbent. He has strong relationships with those who actually elect him from all the different member states, effectively, and he knows what to say to those people to make that happen. Now, Tim Mayer will have to convince many of those. Many do not believe that Ben Sulayem is doing the best job, but if he promises the people that vote for him what they want, then they will vote for Ben Sulayem, right, regardless of what it could mean for the rest of the motorsport world and some of the problems that we have had, let's say, with his leadership over the last few years. But Tim Mayer is not set to be the only candidate challenging for the FIA presidency. Laura Villas has thrown her hat into the ring. Now, I've not heard of Laura Villas before this, so we'll have a quick look at her career. But the key thing to note is, before you talk about anything else, is that she is 28, right? So, whatever you want to say, top to bottom about this story, because it is going to be controversial, of course, it seems incredibly implausible. I'm 26, right? It seems incredibly implausible that anyone this young, full stop, could accrue the necessary support and experience and, well, as I say, just belief in the people that are actually going to vote for these individuals, having the relationships to pull off basically an upset like that and usurp the incumbent feels nigh on impossible for anyone under the age of 45, probably. So 28 seems ambitious to say the very least. But anyway, this is what she's all about. She's done this post. I will say, according to the Racing News 365 article we're going to see in a second, apparently while this application is, well, the candidacy has been put out publicly, apparently the FIA have not yet actually received the official verdict, as it were. So anyway, she does this post here. She was talking about it a lot on social media today, and there's a few things that she wants to promote. So Villas 28 has joined incumbent President Ben Sulayem and former F1 steward Tim Mayer in seeking the next term of office. The election is due to be held later this year, because I think the timeline for when these applications had to be in by, if you guys wanted to be a candidate, was very shortly indeed. She said that the FIA must once again be the federation of clubs and license holders. My ambition is a governance that is more democratic, more transparent, more responsible, and open to women and new generations. I strongly believe that motorsport needs diversity and innovation to keep inspiring younger generations worldwide. These are her 5 key points on her manifesto. Empower clubs through regular consultations and participatory governance, strengthen transparency in finance and decision making, which is clearly a key weakness of the current regime. Introduce an FIA Eco Performance label recognizing sustainability leadership. Enhance the Women in Motorsport program. Position the FIA as the global benchmark in sustainable mobility and road safety. So again, good points, sure. Will they resonate with the members that elect the president? That remains to be seen. And as the article goes on to kind of describe her background, her racing career, and what she's been up to over the last couple of years, she's competing in the Ligier European Series inspired by the Le Mans 24 this year, and she talked about a couple of things. And I think it was in this article, maybe it was in the other one, actually, yeah, it was the bottom line here. The FIA has confirmed to Racing News 365 that it has yet to receive official candidacy application from Villas. So, yes, it sounds good on paper. And if she was to get the job, as it were, would she do a better job than MBS in many respects? I would not be surprised if in many respects, yes. But the chances of this actually happening, you've got to put in the 0.1%. I mean, it's probably lower than that, isn't it, really? So anyway, that's how it stands, but that's an update for you all, which kind of came out of nowhere today. We also have a few things on Media Day. So let's begin here. George Russell was not at Media Day today, which is, I will say, interesting timing, just because of all the questions that have been going on and will, of course, continue to get put to him today about the contract. Where's the contract, George? Why have you not signed the deal yet? Where are you going to be driving next year? Toto says that if you want a 2-year deal, that's a bad mindset. You know, there's been all these comments that have gone around over the last week or so. So George is apparently unwell. I believe that he probably is unwell, right? But of course, it's interesting timing given that, all the questions around his future are still circulating more so than ever. And apparently he's basically fine. His trainer said that he's okay. He'll be back tomorrow. And we see this relatively often. So I don't think there's anything crazy in that. Now, Kimi Antonelli was asked for his comments about Toto calling him underwhelming, or certainly calling his weekend underwhelming, back at the Italian Grand Prix in Monza. And he says, look, he meant mostly about the race on the hard tyre. I was struggling. I made a mistake at the start. I agree with the comment. I took it as a positive, and fuel to be even better this weekend. He just wants me to have a clean weekend to regain the momentum that I had at the first races of the season. So it's a big weekend for Kimi. To be honest, every weekend kind of is, because the pressure is certainly mounting. And this links to a pretty interesting article here. It was actually Blick that put this out. Now, I will say, all they said is this. They just question why we don't have any confirmations yet on Antonelli or George's future. Now, George or Kimi, they're not going anywhere. Toto even said it in an interview a couple of weeks back. I think it was at Zandvoort, maybe. He said that they're not going anywhere. Like, that is our driver lineup next year. It's just not official based on the contracts or whatever. So people are kind of running with this and saying, oh, well, could Russell go somewhere else? There's no doubt that Russell, he's going to be nowhere else. It wouldn't make any sense. He's going to be at Mercedes. Mercedes need him. There's no doubt about that. Of course, they speculate here in the article, does he want too much money? Does he want fewer days where he has to do sponsorship stuff? He commented that he would pay money if he could actually challenge for the title. Now, so that's one side of it. The Antonelli side is just a question, really, and all they do is they throw into the air, has he been underperforming? Certainly compared to expectations, you've got to say yes. A swap with Sainz at Williams would make sense. What about relegation to Alpine? They need a driver. So I think Blick here, they're not saying this based on sources. They're just kind of speculating. So anyway, there was some talk about all these reports are suggesting that maybe Antonelli's going to get dropped because of the slump. But I don't really think there's anyone actually saying this internally at Mercedes. Even if you might think it's a good idea or he needs more time or whatever you want to say, the chances of this happening, maybe not 0.01%, but they are still substantially low. Now, speaking of Carlos Sainz, because again, people are wondering, well, what if Antonelli went there? What if Hamilton somehow went back to Mercedes? What if Sainz somehow went back to Ferrari? I mean, look, all this stuff is absolute fantasy land stuff. It's never going to happen. But Sainz has been in the news as well because he was very adamant over the last couple of days about having full-time stewards. Sainz, it makes sense for his perspective. He just had a couple of controversial incidents. He was on one side of one and the other side of another. Back in the Dutch Grand Prix, when Liam Lawson moved over, squeezed him out of any room, and Sainz inexplicably got a penalty for that. The stewards eventually did have a meeting. Williams protested, and the steward said, okay, you guys were right. It should have just been a racing incident. Now, I also think that it was a racing incident between Behrman and Sainz at the Italian Grand Prix, but Behrman got a 10-second penalty for that. And they didn't protest that one either. But the point is that the drivers don't really know what's going to happen. It is such a shambles, honestly, that we have a state of affairs where the stewards weekend to weekend are not only different, but their expenses are paid by the FIA and basically nothing else. They don't even there's no full-time stewards. This is meant to be the biggest and the most prestigious motorsport in the world. The drivers are getting paid, the top drivers getting paid in the tens of millions. The top engineers and designers are getting paid in the tens of millions. We've got teams worth $5 billion, according to recent valuations of McLaren. And yet we have a sport where somehow the stewards who govern this whole thing, race to race, weekend to weekend, with millions of viewers around the world, apparently they can just be volunteers and it's perfectly fine, right? It clearly causes so many issues, and Sainz says we need full-time stewards. It would at least create some consistent decision-making. That should be a way forward where at least 2 or 3 stewards are permanent and we have one rotational. So he's like, look, you don't necessarily have to have everyone the same, and every single weekend they have to travel around the world 24 times. But at least have a couple, 2 or 3, that are there every weekend. They can set the terms. They have a couple of other stewards to help them with certain decisions. But surely this is just so logical. Look, if I was running for FIA president, well, to be fair, even if you say this, it's great for the fans, it's great for the community. But if you put this on your manifesto, the member states don't really care about this stuff, right? They care about things that benefit themselves. So that's why Ben Sulayem, as controversial as his reign has been, he understands what keeps him elected, and Tim Mayer and Laura Villas need to understand that as well. Just another thing on the FIA, there's been lots of talk lately about reverse grids. They of course exist in FIA Formula 2, FIA Formula 3, but not in FIA Formula 1, and Oscar Piastri, now of course from his perspective, he's leading the championship, so of course he's not going to want reverse grids, but even having said that, I think most people are vehemently against this idea, and yeah, he made a few comments on this. I think his overall perspective was pretty valid, that in F2 and F3, reverse grids make some sense because it's not about necessarily winning the championship at all costs. Yes, you want to win F2, you want to win F3, but you mainly are trying to impress, right? That's the point. And obviously winning and being second or whatever gets very close to doing so. But the reason why they are reverse grids is because it gives opportunities for drivers to have more compelling races, to overtake, to attack, to defend, and learn their racing craft, right? That's kind of the point of the reverse grid, is to enable that to be more plausible. Whereas in F1, you're not doing that anymore. You're already a Formula 1 driver. At this point, it's about winning the championship at all costs. There is no other level to it. And that's Piastri's point, right, is that any of these kind of suggestions are just pretty outrageous, because in F1, you don't have that next step. Okay, whatever, more sprints, fine, I guess, but I don't think reverse grids is a good idea. And even if, I think Pierre Gasly was asked to comment on it, and he was like, yeah, sound, I'm down, right? Like, instead of being P20, P19, P18, I'll be at the start of the, the run at the front of the grid. If they did a full reverse grid, which they might not do, but, there are some questions on that. So, of course, if you're a driver leading the championship, you're going to be against it. If you're a driver in a worse car, you might be in favour of at least giving it a go. So you can't really rely on what the drivers say for a valid assessment here, but I do think that Piastri is pretty much on the money. Now, let's talk about the other teams. Ferrari, a few things to say on them. This is kind of remarkable. Perez will be in Formula 1 again next year. He'll be driving a Cadillac powered by Ferrari for the next couple of years. And he will be doing a test after Baku in the SF23, of course, car that got pole around Baku a couple of years ago. and he'll be doing a test in the UK with a car supplied by Ferrari. So Cadillac have a deal with Ferrari so they can do tests in an old Ferrari car so that they can get ready to go for the upcoming year. Perez is going to be in one of those, which is kind of exciting. Now, Charles Leclerc, understandably, is getting asked questions on his future with the Scuderia. Is it going to work? Is it ever going to work? Leclerc says, I've always loved Ferrari. That is where I draw my motivation from. I want to bring Ferrari to the top no matter how long it takes, he says. Now, Leclerc's good at PR. I'm sure that there will be questions in the back of his mind and in the back of his team's minds, as in his personal team rather than Ferrari's mind, to say, look, is this going to work in the longer term? I think next year will be critical to that decision longer term for Charles Leclerc. But of course, to the media, he's going to say, look, I'm absolutely fully committed to it. It must be so frustrating, though, for Leclerc and for Hamilton to recognise that their chances of winning anything this year in terms of a race are just very, very slim. Yeah, Hamilton won the sprint in China. Leclerc's had a handful of podiums. But as he says, I think McLaren is going to be the strongest team alongside Red Bull. I think that in Monza, they definitely had something that seemed to be working well. Maybe we can have some more chances. Leclerc is unbelievable around Baku historically. And I mean, he's literally been on pole here 21, 22, 23 sprint, 24 sprint, or 23 sprint, 23 race, 24 race. Like the last 5 competitive qualifying sessions in a row, Leclerc's stuck at P1. And he says, look, I believe that we can do something at Baku. Maybe. But Hamilton says, I don't think there's any track we can beat these guys, right? You know, he was asked, maybe Baku, Singapore, they could give you some chances. And he says, look, we'll try. But I think that there's no track where we can beat the McLarens, maybe the Red Bull. They're just ahead. They're ahead in Monaco. They're ahead everywhere. And even if you are ahead as a Ferrari, on lap 3, you get told to lift and coast for temperatures. So, you know, good luck with that. The Ferrari rear wing is going to be a Spa spec with a trimmed down DRS flap. So it's basically what they used in Spa. They might not use it again, so they're just going to trim it off a little bit, kind of like what Red Bull did in Monza last year. This year, they actually had a proper Monza rear wing, and it worked out rather well for Max, as we know. Top speed will be key. They need good grip in the tighter sections. You know, there's going to be a lot of reliance, I think, on Charles Leclerc's brilliance around the circuit to try and make something happen, but you know, we'll see what Hamilton is capable of doing as well. Around Baku, of course, he's had his ups here, he's had his downs. The other story is around Red Bull and what's going on that front, because AMUS, very reputable publication, they came out the other day and said the decision is, with all intents and purposes, made. Hadjar is in, Tsunoda is gone out of Red Bull alongside Max next year. This seems pretty likely, let's be honest. Hadjar, yeah, maybe you think it's too early, but for a couple of reasons, it might make more sense now than it has done previously. And also, he has stuck a Racing Bulls on the podium. It's very challenging in that scenario not to at least want to try him out for the promotion, but it does feel like under McKees, they're giving Yuki a little bit of a longer leash than Christian Horner would, for example. But Red Bull say they are undecided. Sources tell ESPN they are undecided. Marco says they are undecided. We are still taking our time. We will watch the next races carefully, then we'll make a decision. So there is a theory that around about the Mexican Grand Prix, that's when they are going to make a final call. But I would not be at all surprised if they are certainly leaning in the direction of getting in Hadjar and getting rid of Tsunoda. That does, as it stands, feel like the most likely scenario. And Tsunoda responded and says, look, these are rumours, it's not a fact, it's not guaranteed. Enjoy the rumours all you like, but I'm still here trying to deliver performances. But yeah, he needs those performances and fast, or we might not see Yuki, well, not just in a Red Bull, but frankly in Formula 1 again. Who knows if other opportunities will actually emerge, even if Alpine is a decent one. He says, yeah, I'll just stick with it. I'm just going to keep doing the job. Singing the reply says Checo was doing the same or saying the same last year, which is kind of true, I guess, but those scenario was slightly different because Perez had a new contract and he thought it was bulletproof, whereas clearly it wasn't. And even Isack Hadjar was asked to comment and says, you think that when I'm in the car in the Racing Bulls I'm thinking about that type of stuff? Absolutely not. I've got my own problems to solve. So Hadjar, you know, some good PR training I think here for this guy, given that he was considered to be a bit of a hothead before he came into Formula 1. I think he's he's frankly done a stellar job, and it seems at least 85% likely he probably gets that Red Bull drive as it stands, although Liam Lawson, who may well stay at Racing Bulls but probably isn't getting the Red Bull drive, is very quick to say, look, Isack, if you do get that drive, then you better be careful, right? Because it has chewed up and spat out a lot of solid drivers over the last few years. But very much interested your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Practice begins tomorrow. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.